Stephen Haslam. He's an ordained minister of the Fellowship of the Inner Light. From 76 through 93, he worked in many roles, including executive assistant to Paul Solomon, pastor of the Virginia Beach Fellowship Center, and traveling the world teaching inner light consciousness and other fellowship teachings. Since 1994, Stephen and his wife Myrrh have lived in Houston, Texas, where he worked with Dr. Rob Pennington, training and coaching executives to balance their authority with collaboration. So, on the topic of peace and conflict, please welcome Stephen Haslam.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Haslam. For those of you who don't know me yet, I've worked at the fellowship in the past for many years. I won't go into that. You can ask everybody about it. I'll start off by saying I learned that the topic of this get-together this year is about peace. And I'll say that, when I began my spiritual journey as a teen, I thought of peace as the absence of conflict. That's what I thought it would be. Probably, most people generally kind of define peace in somewhat a similar way. But since peace is a part of, I would say, since conflict is a part of nature, conflict is natural. So a world without conflict is unnatural. That really confused me for a while. I'll get back to that. For those of you who knew my father, Herbert Haslam, I always thought he was a better man than me. For those of you who know it, the song Leader of the Band really applies here. You can research that on your own. He introduced me to many spiritual teachings, and he literally drove me to the Fellowship of the Inner Light in Virginia Beach. He also taught me how to fight. I was a skinny little kid, but very feisty. So he probably thought I needed to learn how to protect myself because I could get in trouble. He even told my older and bigger brother to protect me. He also told me if he ever heard that I started a fight, he'd kick my ass. So, yeah, at 10 years old, when I was 10 years old, a friend of mine picked a fight with me in his own front yard. And as I started to walk away, as I had been taught to do, he hit me from behind. I kept walking away because I didn't want my dad to kick my ass. But I felt him coming at me again. So I dodged aside, turned around, and hit the guy once. Broke his nose. I didn't have a lot of verbal negotiating skills at that age. But fortunately for me, my dad didn't kick my ass. So obviously, I was taught to walk away when somebody else tried to pick a fight with me. I remember once my brother, yeah, I can remember the stinging pain of being punched in the face and the numbness in my own fist from hitting his face. We didn't go anywhere beyond that. And at 12 years old, for me, when I was 12 years old, my dad was about to slap me because of some dumbass thing I really shouldn't have done, my own fault. I reflexively raised my fists against him. This is a skinny little 12-year-old kid against his father. And he laughed. And he said something like, "You can't do anything to me at your age." For a split second, I was prepared to take the pain of fighting against him with my sights on kicking his ass in the future. And I thought, and I said to him, "Just you wait." In that moment, I realized I would grow and could eventually have the physical power to defend myself even against him. I think I think he was shocked by the look on my face because he walked away. Very Oedipal for those of you who know Greek mythology. So, yeah, I take the time to tell you these stories because, in my own very small and personal way, I do have some experience with physical conflict. And I could tell you a few more stories. But as a teenager, at the same time that I became involved with the martial arts, I also, I would say, fantasized a more perfect spiritual life without conflict, one in which I was at peace with myself and lived in a community in which we were all in harmony with one another. I thought that, that's the purpose of being spiritual, to be in that state of being in a state of harmony that was to be beyond all that conflict stuff. But I still studied martial arts as a teenager so I wouldn't get my ass kicked. I didn't see the conflict of that at the time. You know, there's a fundamental problem with the idea that peace is the absence of inner and or outer conflict. If you think about it, there's never been a time in history when conflict did not exist between peoples. Conflict in and of itself is natural. There has never been and could never be a time in the natural world when conflict would not exist. I mean, according to what we call ancient teachings, the forces of yin and yang are always at war with one another throughout the galaxy. The yang energy of light from the sun is literally bent and redirected and absorbed by the yin magnetic force of gravity. The yang light generation from the sun is at once a powerfully destructive and a life-giving force. The yin gravity of planets can at once be a saving and stabilizing and a crushing force. So that's all the science I'll bring today. You can Google Neil deGrasse Tyson and he'll entertain you for hours on these topics. He's great. So if peace is the absence of conflict, but conflict is natural to life, isn't that a conflict in itself? I love ironies and paradoxes. In a paradox, when two statements are each true, but are at the same time mutually exclusive, that paradox suggests there is a higher truth that encompasses them both. And that's the point here. You can't eliminate conflict in order to experience peace. Of course, okay, let's go to Google and AI. They can give us some generally accepted definitions of peace from religious and spiritual perspectives. So, many traditions, spiritual traditions, view peace as a state of inner tranquility and a connection to something larger than oneself. In Christianity, the peace of God is described as a gift that transcends all understanding, a calmness of body, mind, and spirit. Drugs can sometimes help with transcending that understanding. In Judaism, the concept of shalom signifies more than just peace. It represents completeness and wholeness and harmony. In in Hinduism, Shanti signifies peace, serenity, nonviolence, undisturbedness. And in Islam, peace is often associated with submission to Allah and a sense of security and well-being. However, it can be dangerous to depend upon a spiritual or religious tradition to define your peace. What if a Christian's gift that transcends all understanding doesn't quite align with a Muslim's submission to Allah? What if a Jew's definition of wholeness is somehow disturbing to a Hindu? How will they have peace between them? Or maybe, I think my version of peace and what would be peaceful would be good for you. And so I think I'm doing you a favor by imposing it on you to bring you peace. I'll make laws requiring you to behave in certain ways so we can all have my version of peace. Lots of that going around these days, all in the name of maybe good intentions. For those of you who are Tolkien fans, Lord of the Rings, that's what the One Ring represents. Enforcing onto others your version of order and supposedly peace in a chaotic world. Personally, I kind of like to apply this Zen koan to the concept of peace. Some of you may have heard this before. If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. Doesn't sound very peaceful for a Buddhist to say that, does it? You could say, if you think you have the true solution to inner and outer peace, kill it. See, the thing is, peace is not some idealistic state transcendent from this ever-changing physical, mental, emotional world in which we live, where conflict is natural. Peace is something you have to continually strive in the midst of natural and human-made conflict in order to achieve. Even if that doesn't sound very peaceful, that's what it is. So, another way of looking at it, peace is not merely an end state, but a process of building understanding and empathy and cooperation and resolving differences and disagreements. It requires ongoing effort to address the root causes of conflict and injustice, which continually re-emerge. Some of these things you'll find on Google and AI. It involves fostering positive attitudes in a more global way, institutions and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. It's all a part of the process of trying to create peace that all of us can share. Therefore, in the midst of an ongoing state of disagreement and conflict, you can experience the process of peace, not the end state. So, okay, I'll step back from philosophy and a grand view of world peace or spiritual peace and just focus on it for a few moments on creating peace in relationships. Okay. Rob Pennington, my business partner and good friend, and I used to say, to experience peace in our relationships, we don't need to agree on everything. We do need to have agreements for how we will resolve our disagreements. So let me give an example. Let's say one person grew up in family A, and in family A, everybody says, I love you. It's just the normal thing to do. I love you. I know I'll call you up on the phone and just say, I don't know, didn't want to talk about anything. I just wanted to say I love you. I love you. Goodbye. You can't hang in family A, you can't hang up the phone until you say, I love you. Goodbye. Boom. That's normal in family A. We always do that. And that's how you know in family A that somebody loves you. It's because they're always saying, I love you. Maybe somebody else is brought up in family B. And family B, we all love each other. You don't have to say it again. We already know that we love each other. Saying it doesn't make it happen. So in family B, if you have to say, I love you over and over again, you start to wonder, wait a minute, why is that person saying that over and over again? Because they don't have to say it if they really love me. So when you get person A and person B together, and person A is going, I love you. How's that feel to person B? It's uncomfortable. It's different. It's not what I'm used to. So how do I know this person really loves me? Maybe they've done something that they don't want me to know about, that, disagrees with other things that I think they should be doing. And they're trying to make up for that. Yeah, that's why they're saying, I love you. How does it feel to person A never being told, I love you? You know, and person, they're going to feel hurt. They're not going to feel loved. And person B's over here thinking, look, I told you I loved you when we got together. If I ever change my mind, I'll let you know. And the tragedy here is these two people could love one another, but they're missing the love that is there because of these behaviors onto which they project, believing whether they are loved or whether there is peace between them. Does this sound familiar? You know, and we end up, as long as we're trying to be right about all these expectations of behaviors, we won't experience being loved or being peaceful. That's the booby prize. You're right, but you don't feel loved or you don't feel peaceful. And this ends up being in like silly little behaviors, you know? Remember, the toilet seat goes down. If the toilet seat goes down, that's the right way to do it. Now that I've told you, and I've told you that it's important to me, then if you don't put the toilet seat down, then I know you must not love me. And there won't be peace in our relationship because the next time I see that toilet seat up, I'm going to let you know. You can fill in the blanks. Or on the other hand, so is the toilet seat really a fundamental requirement in a relationship in order to have peace or love? Or, on the other hand, is monogamy just a preference or is it a fundamental requirement? We gotta work out these preferences and fundamental requirements. You know, maybe monogamy in this relationship to me is just a preference. I'd like to have it, but maybe I'm okay with not having it, and I'll you got to get clear about these agreements. We need to have agreements for how to resolve our disagreements about beliefs. They're not right or wrong. about habitual behaviors that are not right or wrong. We just have to be able to communicate and resolve them. How do we go about resolving these differences? Hopefully, without damaging one another. Along these same lines, Rob and I used to teach managers how to resolve conflicts and facilitate cooperation in the workplace. So employee A would come to the manager and complain about employee B. And employee B would complain to the manager about employee A. And each A and B would expect the manager to deal with the other person and resolve the problem. Sounds like family counseling. Kids coming to the parent, yo, I'm complaining about my brother and sister. Same thing happened between teams, between departments, between engineering and operations, between accounting and actually between accounting and everybody else. This is what we told the managers to do. Okay. So what we told the managers was tell employee A, I have an assignment for you. Get together with employee B and interview that person. Find out what their concerns are, what their complaints are, what their frustration is. I want you to be able to describe to me their concerns. And then he would tell employee B, I want you to get together with employee A. This is an assignment and find out what their concerns are. Don't justify, don't explain yourself. Just be able, and I'm going to get the two of you together. And employee A, I'm going to say to you, I want you to tell me employee B's concerns so well in front of them that there's nothing that they can add. I want you to be able to fully understand and be able to explain their concerns with me. Employee B, I want you to be able to do the same thing with employee A. Explain their concerns to me without them being able to add anything because you did it so well. It's a very challenging thing. It sounds very simple, but it's a very challenging thing to do. So, whenever people do this, what ends up happening is employee A and employee B come together and they end up working out most of their stuff. And anything else that they can't work out is something that the manager or the parent or the authority figure does need to resolve because it's usually a different interpretation of what the different goals are, what the different agreements or roles are, how to interpret what the law is in society. But when people focus on understanding first, it resolves a large percent, the largest percent of disagreements. So remember as a teenager, I told you as a teenager, I wanted to live in a spiritual world of harmony. Well, that sure didn't happen. The world in which I live now is a little bit different. I'll give you an example. A few months ago, two of my neighbors almost came to physical blows. So, on the one hand, Steve is a lawyer who runs his two dogs off leash. Zach is a karate instructor who trains his dogs incessantly on leash, very disciplined. Zach said to Steve, I'll kick your ass if your dogs come onto my property again without a leash. Steve said, you do that, I'll get my gun. You got to know, folks, I'm living in Texas, so you got to expect that. back and forth, back and forth, back. And I somehow got caught in the middle of this conversation. So, I separated them. I spent time alone with Steve to make sure he felt understood. And then, when it seemed appropriate, I helped him understand why Zach was so upset. I'm really condensing this. This took hours. Later, I did the same with Zach. I didn't try to get them to hug or to make up or to live in harmony. I just got them to understand where the other person was coming from. And now Steve takes his dogs to a dog park, and Zach has not kicked anybody's ass, which he could have done. And peace reigns in our neighborhood. I can live with that. Doesn't solve all the world's conflicts, challenges, doesn't bring inner or outer peace to everybody, but it resolves that one thing that was right in front of me. So, okay, I brought up the phrase inner peace. What about inner peace? That'd be a whole nother talk. But I'll just say a few things. You might say the absence of inner stress is a sign of inner peace. But in my opinion, you'd be wrong. Remember, conflict is natural and can be good for us. So, conflict in nature is natural. Inner conflict is natural, can be good for us. Rob Pennington and I would teach basic tenets about stress. Inner stress is resistance to change. Inner stress is a signal that a change is needed. That's good information. You listen to the inner stress, you get information about the change that is needed that will make your life more effective, more productive, more whatever. The purpose of tension is to get your attention. Now, an example, if you cut yourself and you couldn't feel the pain, bad things could happen. You need to listen to the pain. It could get even worse. But if you listen to it and make the appropriate change, healing can happen. The same is true. Mental stress, mental pain, emotional stress, emotional pain. Pain is necessary. Suffering is optional. If you listen to the pain, make the appropriate change, you don't have to go through suffering. So you can learn from listening to your stress, understanding it. And so make the changes that bring healing and peace. So I'll wrap this up. Finally, I'll just say this. Can you be at peace with yourself, with others, while you're surrounded by disagreement and conflict and people doing dumbass things you don't like, without having to force onto others your version of what would be peaceful to you? If you can, then maybe you can find a way to help others find their own peace in the midst of their conflicts, to provide understanding to them because you're at peace in the middle of disagreement or conflict. And I'm telling you, if you work out how to be in that state all the time, please do let me know, because I ain't gotten there yet. And that's all I have to say about peace and conflict. When I reviewed the video that you just watched, me talking about peace, I realized I do have one more brief thing to say about peace and conflict. I promise it's brief. Uh, Basically, Paul pointed out to me that In a world that is not perfectly balanced and constantly changing, we have to continually work to create and find peace in the midst of conflict. So many of you know I had been an avid student of Tai Chi and I Ching teachings. In my naivety, of which I had a lot, I thought I was pretty good. I thought I had a pretty good handle on the basics of yin and yang, much more so than anyone else at the fellowship. Pretty good, egotistical, eh? One day, Paul actually picked up my I Ching book. He leafed through it, and then he said, I think I'll do a talk on the I Ching tonight. Just like that. And I thought, wait a minute, you haven't studied I Ching. You should have me do that talk. I didn't say that, but I thought it. So, Paul's primary esoteric study was Kabbalah, not I Ching. So, what would he know that I didn't know? You can probably see from these comments where this is going. In I Ching teachings, there are two different arrangements of the trigrams, the inner arrangement and the outer arrangement. The inner arrangement is perfectly balanced with opposites. Heaven and earth, father and mother are balancing opposites. First son and first daughter are balancing opposites, and so on. But the outer arrangement does not have this perfect balance. I could never figure out why. If yin and yang were all about balance, why did they have two different arrangements, one of which is not perfectly balanced? Never made sense to me. Paul understood certain principles I hadn't figured out yet. Principles about life that were not Oriental or Occidental, but were contained in Kabbalah as well as I Ching and probably in any other overall system of cosmology. He pointed out that the inner arrangement reflects what you could call an inner plane of idealism, something that Jung referred to reflected in idealistic myths and legends, the stories of which never quite work out in that idealistic way in the real world. The outer arrangement reflects the cycles through which we struggle in the real world in order to gain a glimpse of the world, of the inner arrangement, or what you might even describe as the Buddhist state of nirvana, just to get a glimpse of that. His explanation was so simple. When he said it, my mind exploded with connections of many things that we had been studying. I couldn't stop laughing. And I looked around and I realized nobody else was laughing. Nobody else had that powerful response. That was one of the benefits of the way that Paul had us study so many different teachings and traditions, because eventually something real would sink in. What I got out of that, if I try to impose on myself and on others some ideal of peace in a world that is constantly changing. Remember, ideals don't change. Ideals are a constant state, but the world is constantly changing. If I try to impose that ideal onto a world that is constantly changing, I'm creating the very conflict that's keeping me from experience peace. Let that sink in. Sorry, again, too long. In a world that's not perfectly balanced, that is constantly changing, we have to continually work to create and find peace in the midst of conflict. The experience of creating that next moment of peace is nirvana. I'm still working on it. Thanks.